Welcome to this session on the 30th anniversary or 30th conference of ISKCON Communications Europe. We're very happy to have you with us, and we're looking forward to getting some nectar and some interesting stories from the time when Prabhupada was present and how he dealt with communications in his lifetime. So thank you very much for joining us, and we're looking forward to asking you a few questions.
Well, thank you so much, Mahaprabhu. It's an honor to be with all the devotees on this auspicious occasion. It is not only the 30th anniversary of the ISKCON Communications office, it is the 50th anniversary in a number of places of Prabhupada's trip to Europe in London from May 18th to May 22nd, 1974. That would be right now, 50 years ago. From May 23rd to May 30th in Rome. From May 30th to June 8th in Geneva. From June 8th to June 15th in Paris. And from June 16th to the 24th in Germany. So a lot of anniversaries to celebrate. I'm going to take the following approach on defining communications from Prabhupada's Markini Bhagavad Dharma, in which one of the verses, one of the favorite verses of mine is, "O spiritual master of all the worlds, I can simply repeat your message. So if you like, you can make my power of speaking suitable for their understanding." I think that's just a lovely transcendental definition of communications, that Krishna will make our words suitable for the understanding of our audience. And surely Prabhupada was expert at doing that, whether preaching or counseling his disciples or talking to guests or giving big lectures. Prabhupada could size up his audience and speak in such a way so that they can understand. Prabhupada never talked at people. Prabhupada talked to people or with people. And so that's a very inspiring thing to me. And I had the chance in May of 1974 to host Srila Prabhupada in Geneva, Switzerland, and watch him up close do exactly that. We had a very busy schedule for Prabhupada. I thought at the time that if I could keep Prabhupada supplied with wonderful preaching opportunities, he might stay longer. I don't know if that was true because I think the itinerary was already planned. But in any event, I wanted Prabhupada's visit to this relatively obscure, at that point in time, temple to be a memorable one for him as well. So we were just a dozen or 14 devotees, and we had recently gotten a very nice building. We were basically homeless, wandering from here and there for a couple of years till we got our actual temple building in which we could receive Prabhupada. So Prabhupada arrived on May 30th, 50 years ago at Geneva International Airport, and his arrival was covered by Swiss National Television, and it was broadcast on the Swiss Evening News. The Swiss authorities gave permission to the devotees to greet Srila Prabhupada directly on the tarmac of the airport, just as he was disembarking from his plane. And Prabhupada was then, that afternoon, officially greeted at the seat of government of the Republic and Canton of Geneva, as they like to call it, by the Honorable Gilbert Duboul, who was the president of the Council of State, often erroneously referred to as the mayor of Geneva by the devotees. The formal welcome ceremony took place in the ornate Alabama Room, where heads of state and religious leaders such as Pope Paul VI are hosted. The Pope was received in the same room as Prabhupada 5 years earlier. So that was day one. Day two, coming to visit Prabhupada and engage in a conversation was Mr. Hennis of the International Labor Office. That was a UN agency devoted to promoting social justice and internationally recognized human and labor rights. It's one of the main agencies of the UN, and to this day functions for that purpose. Mr. Hennis met Prabhupada in his quarters. It was an intimate setting, and there were a few devotees there, about 5 or 6, attending. Satsrup Maharaj was the secretary. Nitai was the Sanskritist traveling with Prabhupada. Hansaduta Prabhu was there. Bhagavan was there. Pushta Krishna Swami was there. Yogeshwara visited at that time. And what a privilege it was for me to get a front row seat that I would never otherwise have gotten. If there was any power to being a temple president, it was that I was able to arrange all that and be present. The next day, that evening, we had the first evening of our Festival of India. Prabhupada lectured to about 1,000 people over a 2-day period on Bhagavad Gita as it is, chapter 4, verse 10. And Geneva, although very famous, is a small city relatively, even smaller back then. In 1974, there was maybe about 160,000 inhabitants of Geneva, but still it had its place on the world map. The next day, Saturday, Pastor Henry Babel, a theologian and a founder of the prestigious Geneva Consultative Committee on Religions, met with Prabhupada. He was the titular pastor of the St. Peter Cathedral, the home church of John Calvin, one of the leaders of the Protestant Reformation. And I'm just going to go through the schedule first, and then I'll try to remember some of the highlights. That evening, we had the second and final evening of the Festival of India. Prabhupada lectured on the next verse of the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 4, verse 11. On Sunday, June 2nd, 1974, we had our usual Sunday feast and our not usual initiation ceremony with Srila Prabhupada presiding. And Swiss National Television came to film that. And there's a special program on that, separate and apart from his arrival reporting. On Monday, June 3rd, 1974, Jean Herbert, who was one of the original interpreters at the founding of the United Nations, he was also a renowned Orientalist, not a professor, just an Orientalist, and an author of a book called The Yoga of Love, The Gesture of Krishna, which it took him 20 years to write. More on that in a few minutes. Also, Professor Konstantin Regame, Indologist, Tibetologist, Sanskrit, scholar of Buddhism and linguistics, musician and composer, and a professor at the University of Lausanne and the University of Freiburg, a very humble, pious man, and a polymath. He was really a genius to be able to do all those things, but he never let you feel it. Then we had the board members of the Theosophical Society come to visit, and that brings us to Tuesday, June 4th. Mr. Salah International Center for Biological Research, which I don't think exists anymore. Madame Cherboulier, representative of the International Committee of the Red Cross, and darshan with members of the Indian community. All of this is taking place in addition to Prabhupada's morning program, Bhagavatam lecture, his evening program, Bhagavad Gita lecture, um, and his talking to devotees, some of whom had been invited to meet with Prabhupada. Karandar flew to Geneva. He was having some difficulties at the time, and Prabhupada invited him to come. That's also communication. And the result of that meeting was he made him GBC of India. Prabhupada didn't want to lose his very valuable disciple. The next day, Wednesday, June 5, 1974, Sergius Golovin, a writer, a researcher of myths, a recording artist, and a publicist, came. He was very humble as well. He was a friend of Friedrich Dürrenmatt, the renowned playwright and novelist, and Timothy Leary, psychologist, author, and notorious proponent of psychedelic drugs. When Sergius Golovin came into the room and sat down, Prabhupada asked him if he had any questions. And Sergius Golovin said, no, I don't. And I remember my face turning really hot red. I couldn't see the red, but I could sure feel the hot. What kind of a man is this that I invited? He's a fool, and I was a fool because I invited a fool. And then just as I was thinking that, he said to Prabhupada, it is an honor to be present before a great spiritual master such as yourself. That took the heat off me immediately. And Prabhupada, understanding what words would be suitable to a man who had no questions, asked for the harmonium and began to do bhajan. It was Gauranga Bolite Habe, to the best of my recollection. Prabhupada closed his eyes and chanted for at least 15 or 20 minutes. And clearly Prabhupada was with Krishna, with Lord Gauranga, to the best of my knowledge. And when he opened his eyes, it was like, oh, we're here. And then Prabhupada had nothing further to say, except he said to me, make sure he gets prasadam. And that was the end of that communication, not by verbal means, but by musical and mantra means. That day, Jean-Marc Dorin was a guest. He spoke with Prabhupada. He was the director of the Protestant Social Center, a private social assistance service intended for people in difficulty. Later that day, Professor Bernard Morel, Doctor of Theology at the University of Geneva, pastor of the Reformed Church of France and the National Protestant Church of Geneva, and an honorary professor at the School of Theology at the University of Geneva, came, along with his colleague, Professor Edmond Rochedieu, also a professor of history and religions at the University of Geneva, and author of The Great Religions of the World, From Antiquity to the Middle Ages. And they brought along a theology student. Again, same day, Robert Guillen, nuclear physicist and engineer at the CERN, the European Council for Nuclear Research. He came by. CERN is an intergovernmental organization, very famous, that operates the world's largest particle physics laboratory in the world. and he was the author of several very complicated books, technical books. The next day was Thursday, June 6th. I was very fortunate to be able to arrange a colloquium at the World Health Organization at the Family Planning Division. Prabhupada at that time was translating fifth canto. And so I thought, wouldn't it be really interesting for Prabhupada to speak to the family planning people about overpopulation, which Prabhupada said there is no such problem. Of course, he was translating the fact that Rishabhadev Maharaj had 100 sons. Yeah, that was something else. There was some controversy. Prabhupada asked me and the other devotees in the room if this was a good idea to go there. It was my habit to give Prabhupada some background before every meeting, because this was really like a conveyor belt of, famous, learned, political, religious, scientific people coming. And Prabhupada didn't skip a beat. He could handle anyone. And but I thought it would be useful to give background. So I showed Prabhupada some of the brochures of the World Health Organization Family Planning Division. And then Prabhupada's face became very grave, and he said, "Why have we arranged this? I will go there, and then they will take a picture of me, Bhaktivedanta Swami, at the World Health Organization Family Planning Division, and mislead readers that somehow I've given my endorsement or approval of their activities." Then he said, "Satsvarup Maharaj, what do you think?" Well, Srila Prabhupada, clearly, perhaps it would be better not to go. Apushta Krishna Maharaj, Yogeshvara. He went around like that. And then he looked at me, and again, of course, that same hotness and redness on the face. I could feel it all. Oops, made a mistake, I guess. And Prabhupada looked at me and said, "Can we make kirtan if we go?" I said, "They won't be able to stop us, Srila Prabhupada." And then Prabhupada said, "Let's go." And you can hear or read the lecture Prabhupada gave on Bhaktivedanta Vedabase. Pretty remarkable. There were quite a number of Indian functionaries working in these international organizations, and they came. They were very curious. An Indian Swami is coming. To the best of my ability to detect, they were a little nervous about where this was all going to head with a religious, spiritual leader, at the World Health Organization. But the more Prabhupada spoke, you could see them. They were like nodding and, the Indian nod, yes, and getting real. And finally, at the end, they were all behind Prabhupada, and they asked some very interesting questions, I think largely to help shore up the Vedic view at an organization that really was not very well versed in the Vedic view. On Friday, Mr. Oleinikoff of the Institute of Social and Preventative Medicine came. Mostly they were working to stop drug abuse. So, of course, Krishna consciousness was the magic formula for that. And that afternoon, a wonderful interview with the largest daily newspaper of Geneva. One of their top journalists, they sent Jean-Claude Mayer, and you can read his interview. It was published in the newspaper, and a sweeter interview by questions and answers you could rarely find. And that was it. The magic was over, and the next day was June 8th, and Prabhupada got over for us at least, with lots of memories of it though, and Prabhupada got on a plane for Paris, where he had further programs. Prabhupada was like the sun rising everywhere in a different place. Some people would say, oh, the sun is setting, but really, while the sun sets where you are, it's rising somewhere else. And Prabhupada circumnavigated the world 12 times in his life. Um, so anyway, um, when Prabhupada was in the Jaladuta in Boston, before disembarking after more than 30 days at sea, he wrote this poem that I referred to before, Markini Bhagavat Dharma. Clearly, Prabhupada was thinking about communications. This was the arrival after a long, arduous trip, and Prabhupada was praying to Krishna to give him the empowerment to speak in a way that his communication, an elderly Bengali gentleman with an accent, but with a message more important than any message anybody ever heard. And so if one is pure, and if one sizes up the audience and speaks for their understanding purely, everything will work out. So that's what I wanted to say.
I have a question. You had the initiative to organize all these meetings for Srila Prabhupada. Was that a lot of work? Did it take weeks of organizing, getting all the people to commit to come and visit Prabhupada? And how did you get inspiration? I don't think anybody really asked you to do such a intense communications program for Srila Prabhupada.
Well, yeah, sure. It kept me busy, but one of the great joys of being a temple president is you can have a vision on how to please Prabhupada, and you have some latitude to do that. It's not just, taking instructions from someone else, which is perfectly valid and also our process. But Prabhupada wanted independently thoughtful men to be temple presidents. And so I thought, let me take advantage of this opportunity. Of course, I had help. As far as arranging the meeting with the president of the Council of State, obviously I was inspired by Prabhupada's reception at the Hotel de Ville in Paris the year before. I was also there personally. And so I thought, well, if Prabhupada could be received there, a very glorious Hotel de Ville, a government, like a palace, really. Hotel de Ville means city hall in French, but it's so much more than the city hall. It really was a palace. Also, the Geneva Hotel de Ville was a palace of government, and it was built in the Renaissance. So that was an inspiration. I didn't have to think that up all by myself. And I put together a presentation book, one of these albums where he had all these pictures in it. And I wrote the chief of protocol of the Council of State of Geneva and sent that to him. And my goal was to make him think, well, Prabhupada was received in Paris. Uh, why wouldn't you want to receive him too? If you don't, it could be considered a diplomatic incident, you know? And sure enough, we even had permission to bring in 15 devotees, although we only brought in a few. Prabhupada actually was supposed to simply say thank you after the welcome talk was over. But instead, Prabhupada gave a Bhagavatam class to the president of the Council of State. And like in Paris the year before, they wanted him to stand while he was being welcomed. But Prabhupada sat down. It was the same thing. In Paris, he said, "What? They want me to stand?" But he didn't stand. Um, he did stand up to shake the mayor, even I made the mistake, to shake the hand of the president of the Council of State. There's a really sweet picture of Prabhupada holding out his hand. And the president of the Council of State, he bowed. He leaned and bowed to Prabhupada, and he did something really remarkable. He called Prabhupada "Your Divine Grace." Now, if you consider we're in the so-called Protestant Rome, the center of the Reformation, calling some Indian spiritual leader your divine grace. That's a lot. That's not what they do, but he did it. And for me, I'll never forget that.
Do you recall if Srila Prabhupada explicitly said why he was meeting all these leaders, and was he satisfied with your all the meetings that you arranged? Did he give any hints about how he was feeling about all these things that you organized for him?
Well, that's a two-part question regarding the why. I just think it was obvious that, Prabhupada wanted to give a golden drop of nectar of Krishna consciousness to everyone. And if you can influence leaders, they are the people who influence society. So that was very important to Prabhupada. He liked to preach to everyone who could help spread Lord Chaitanya's movement. In fact, the subject of his talk was proper government, and he tried to point that out to the president of the Council of State. Regarding whether Prabhupada was satisfied, I fast forward about 10 months later. I managed to get very lucky on my way to Mayapur with a transfer in Bombay. Prabhupada was in Bombay. And when I arrived, Prabhupada was coming out on morning walk. So we jumped out of our cab, told him to drop all the baggage off at the front door of the Juhu temple, and we went on morning walk. And after the morning walk, the talk of all of Hare Krishna land was Prabhupada's leaving tomorrow for Mayapur, Calcutta, Mayapur. Everyone was scrambling to get a booking on the same flight with Prabhupada. And they were having a lot of difficulty. So I took my ticket out of my money belt, these blue money belts where you keep things for safety. I bought this ticket for myself and two other Geneva devotees in December, previous to the Mayapur festival. So at least, 3 months earlier. And sure enough, we were on Prabhupada's flight. What a stroke of good fortune. So I was able to enter the airport compound, go through security, and I took my seat in the waiting room, and just across from me was Prabhupada. And I was chanting my japa, trying to look Krishna conscious, because I thought Prabhupada might notice me and didn't want him to think I was a poor excuse for a disciple. And then at one point, Prabhupada went like this. And I remember I went like, and Prabhupada went like this. So I came over to Prabhupada. He was seated on one of these, kind of commercial, funky, fake leather, plastic, sofas that they have in airports. And he tapped the seat right next to him, which was empty, that I should sit down right next to him. And I thought, I can't sit on the same level with the spiritual master. But then I immediately thought, I can't disobey the spiritual master. I sat down, and Prabhupada leaned in and said, so, how is the president of Geneva feeling these days? Is he still worried about what will happen to the Swiss economy if all the young boys and girls join our movement? And Prabhupada's acuity was remarkable, because the one question that the president asked Prabhupada at the end, because remember, I said it was a Bhagavatam class, so Prabhupada said, do you have any questions? This was just a meet and greet, but Prabhupada turned it into a preaching communication opportunity. He said, do you have any questions? And he actually had a question, because he had listened, I don't know, maybe about 25 minutes to Prabhupada talk. And, he got a question. And the question was, what will happen to the Swiss economy if all the young boys and girls of Switzerland join your movement? And Prabhupada hadn't forgotten that in almost a year. It was 10 months later. And that was what Prabhupada said to me. And then when we were about to board the flight, Prabhupada said to me, if you can get a meeting at the UN, I will come anytime.
Jai.
So I think that means, yes, he considered preaching like that to be very important.
Thank you very, very much for sharing this very intense communication schedule that you organized for Srila Prabhupada. He didn't complain, so he must have felt it was very worthwhile to do it.
Now, one of his disciples who was present commented later on that it was like nonstop. And he wondered how Prabhupada had the stamina to translate Bhagavatam, give the programs in the temple to the devotees, write letters. In my research for the memoir that I'm working on, I've seen Prabhupada wrote about a dozen letters from Geneva addressing big problems to big disciples all over the world. And morning walk lectures too, talks on morning walks. I mean, Prabhupada was just, it was phenomenal. It was just phenomenal.
Thank you very, very much. And we hope to have you one time live in our communications conference to share some other stories and realizations that you may have of Srila Prabhupada and his communications skills. So thank you very, very much.
Well, I'm sorry I can't be with all of you, but thanks to Mahaprabhu for also being an organizer of events. And I hope everyone benefits greatly from the communications conference.
Thank you, thank you. Hare Krishna. Jai
Hare
Srila
Krishna.
Prabhupada.
Glories to Prabhupada.
Hare Bol.